Today is Wednesday, October 7th. Let's go ahead and start with a review of your books of the Bible this week. Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. Again, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. On Monday, our lesson was on a bride for Isaac. Abraham's servant Eliezer was asked to go and find a bride for Isaac. Isaac is about 40 at this time. Remember, Sarah had died. Abraham's a lot older, and so he knew it was time for Isaac to get a wife because he wanted to pass the blessing down to Isaac. And so he tells Eliezer to go back to his hometown and find his family and find Isaac a wife there. So Eliezer goes and he arrives at the well, and when he gets to the well, he makes sure that he prays, and so he asks the Lord, he says, God, guide me on who to pick for Isaac. And so he says, Lord, give me a sign. Whichever woman comes and gives me and my camels a drink, then she would be the bride for Isaac. And the first woman that comes up, she offers water to Eliezer and she offers water to his camels. So he knew that this was the woman that God had sent for Isaac. And so he asked her name. Her name was Rebecca. Her father was named Nahor, which was the brother of Abraham. So he found someone from Abraham's family. So he goes and he meets with her family. He explains to them why he's there. They ask Rebecca if she is willing to marry Isaac. She says yes. And so Eliezer praises God because God answered his prayer and God allowed him to do what was asked of him. And so they arrive back into the land of promise, and she marries Isaac. Isaac and Rebecca wanted to have children. They actually waited 20 years before the Lord blessed them with children. And so God, whenever Rebecca was expecting, God not only gave her one baby, but he blessed them with twin boys. And so God had given Rebecca a promise when she had the babies. He told her that the older son would serve the younger son, which was different from what we normally know. Usually the older is, the younger serve the older, but in this case, God would do something different. The older son would serve the younger son. So they had their two sons, their twin boys, and they named them Jacob and Esau. Esau was the older twin. He was more red and he was hairy. And then Jacob was the younger one, and he was, normal looking, darker skinned and everything. He was, normal looking. And so the twin boys, when they grew up, they also were totally different. Esau was more of an outdoors person. He liked to hunt. And Jacob was more of a home person. He would cook inside the house and clean and things like that. And so, of course, their parents taught them about the Lord and taught them about worshiping God and about the promise that was given to Abraham. And now their father, Isaac, was carrying that promise. And so one day, the boys were, Esau had came back from hunting and Jacob was in the house. And so Esau, he was so hungry that he was like, Jacob, could you please cook me something? Cook that red bean soup that I like so much. And so Jacob came up with a plan. He was like, well, I could cook for him, but I want him to give me his birthright. Now, the birthright is the blessing, right? It's the material blessing, all the animals that their father had, all the servants, all the land, all of that. And then the spiritual blessings that come from heaven, all the blessings that God would give. And so Esau was the oldest son, yes. So rightfully so, Esau would get the blessings because that's who the blessing goes to, the older son. But remember, God would do something different. God would give the blessing to the younger son, which would be Jacob in this case, and not Esau. But the thing is, God would do it on his time, and God would do it his way, not Jacob's way. So Jacob was coming up with this plan to trick his brother when the blessing was already going to be for Jacob anyway. But he just thought that he would do that. So he says, Esau, I'll cook the food for you, Esau, if you give me your blessing. And so you would think Esau would say, oh, no, not my blessing. That's a good thing to have a blessing. Esau says, okay, you can have it for food. And so Jacob cooks Esau the food and he gives it to Esau. And so Esau basically gave away his blessing. And I told you on yesterday that kind of can show us why God was willing to give it to Jacob instead of Esau, because look how easy Esau was willing to give it up for food, and Jacob, he understood how important the blessing was, because look how he tricked his way to try and get it. And so, yeah, they both had different views on the blessing, and Jacob knew how important and how serious the blessing was, while Esau, he was willing to give it up easy for food. And so it wasn't right for Jacob to do that. He tricked his brother, and I told you this was just the beginning. And so let's go ahead and get into our lesson today. So years have passed since Jacob stole the blessing from his brother Esau. Now, the blessing hadn't been passed down yet, so they didn't even have the blessing. The blessing was still on their father Isaac. So, he did all of that, and he didn't even get the blessing right away. But anyway, so years passed, and, God continued to bless Isaac. He had a lot of wealth, he had a lot of riches, and he was a great man. And so and they knew that. That's why they wanted the blessing, because they saw how much God was blessing their father. And so Isaac was pretty old at this point. He was sick, he was weak, and he was almost blind. And so he thought that he would die very soon. And so he didn't want to die before it was time to pass on the blessing. And so he knew what God had said, that Jacob would receive the blessing and not Esau. But remember yesterday I told you that Isaac had a favorite son and Rebekah had a favorite son. And Isaac's favorite son was Esau. So when Isaac realized that he could die soon, he said, okay, well, I need to pass the blessing on down. And so should Isaac do it God's way or his way? I hope you said God's way. Well, Isaac didn't do it God's way. He said, I will give the blessing to Esau, because Esau is the older son. But remember, that's not what God wants. So Isaac calls Esau and he says, my son, you see that I am old. I could die almost at any day. Take your bow and arrows and go out in the fields and get me some venison and prepare a tasty meal for me. Bring it to me, and I will give you the blessing that belongs to you, the firstborn, before I die.